Tell me, Marcus, does it ever itch, the skin they stitched onto your face, to make you look like the man I despise? The silence in our Seattle penthouse was deafening. I stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, the reflection of the rain blurring the city lights. I didn't turn around. I could feel him behind me, the man who had been sharing my bed and my secrets for 6 months. Clara, what are you talking about? The medication is making you paranoid, he said, that voice smooth, calm, and utterly fraudulent. I turned slowly, a glass of bourbon in one hand and a thick medical folder in the other. I slammed the folder onto the glass coffee table. Thud. Paranoid. Let's talk about paranoid, you son of a bitch, I hissed, my voice trembling with a cocktail of pure rage. I spent 7 years being a punching bag for Marcus. I know every scar, every grunt, every way he used to break my spirit. You're too kind. You hold the door open. You don't drink yourself into a stupor before hitting me. That was your first mistake. He moved toward me, reaching out. Clara, honey, don't you dare touch me, I roared, shattering the bourbon glass against the wall inches from his head. Glass shards sprayed like diamonds. I checked the dental records, Julian, or whoever the hell you are. Marcus had a bridge on his lower molars. Your teeth are perfect. Your x-rays at the clinic today showed a titanium plate in your femur that Marcus never had. So who are you, and where is the body of the man I was supposed to divorce? The kind husband mask didn't just slip. It disintegrated. His shoulders squared, his gaze sharpened into something lethal. You're smarter than the agency said, he said, his voice dropping into a gritty rasp. Most wives would have just thanked God their abusive husband finally learned some manners. I don't want manners. I want justice. I stepped into his space, poking a finger hard into his chest. I was his wife. I endured his filth for years, waiting for the day I could take my half of his $7.2 million and watch him rot. Then you show up, you steal my revenge. I saved your life, Clara, he countered, grabbing my wrist to steady me. The night of the crash, Marcus was fleeing. He had a hit out on both of you. If I hadn't stepped in, Special Agent Sterling would have cleared this penthouse with a flamethrower months ago. Oh, so I should thank you for gaslighting me. I laughed, a bitter, jagged sound. I am not a pawn in your spy game. Tell me right now, where is Marcus? Marcus died in the ravine. I watched him burn. I'm here for the ledger. He hid the one Sterling is willing to kill half of Seattle to find. The $7.2 million ledger? I whispered. Exactly, and Sterling is already at the front gate. He pointed to the monitors. 3 black SUVs had just breached the perimeter. Get in the panic room, Clara, now. Like hell I will. I grabbed a heavy brass statue, my knuckles white. I've spent years being told what to do by a man with that face. If I'm going down, I'm fighting the people who took my freedom, including you. The front door exploded inward with a deafening boom. Clara, listen, Julian shouted, drawing a pistol. You want your money, your revenge, then pick up that gun in the drawer. Today, you start being the monster they're afraid of. I pulled the drawer open and gripped the cold steel. I'm not playing Julian, but if we survive this, I'm shooting you next. He smirked. I'd expect nothing less. The smell of cordite and pulverized drywall filled the air, stinging my throat. My ears were ringing from the explosion, but my vision had never been clearer. For 7 years, I had lived in a fog of fear. Now the fog was replaced by a red mist of adrenaline. Get down! Julian yelled, lunging toward me as a hail of suppressed gunfire shattered the remaining windows. I didn't cower. I didn't scream. I shoved him away, my fingers wrapping around the cold, textured grip of the Glock 19 I'd pulled from the drawer. "I told you, don't touch me!" I barked. I rolled behind the heavy marble kitchen island, the stone chipping as bullets peppered the other side. "Clara, you don't know how to use that," Julian hissed, crouched 5 feet away, his borrowed face shadowed by the flickering emergency lights. "Marcus took me to the range every Sunday to show off his trophy wife, who could shoot," I snarled, checking the slide just like he'd taught me while he was belittling my stance. He wanted a bodyguard he could sleep with. Little did he know he was training his own executioner. 2 men in tactical gear crested the debris of the front door. They moved with mechanical precision, Sterling's boys. Professional cleaners. "Target sighted! Take the man, secure the woman!" one shouted. "Secure this!" I screamed. I leaned out from the island, the weight of the gun feeling like an extension of my own arm. I didn't think. I just let the 7 years of suppressed rage pull the trigger. Pop, pop, pop. The first man stumbled, a crimson flower blooming on his shoulder. He wasn't dead, but he was screaming. Julian didn't waste the opening. He moved like a blur, not like a husband, but like a weapon. He fired 2 precise shots, and both men went down for good. He turned to me, his eyes wide with a mix of shock and something that looked dangerously like admiration. "You're a goddamn lunatic, Clara." "I'm a woman who's had enough," I replied, my voice steady despite the chaos. "Now, where is the ledger? If Sterling is here, he's not just looking for a ghost. He's looking for the $7.2 million. "It's not in the house," Julian said, reloading his clip with practiced ease. "Marcus was smarter than that. He kept the digital key in a safety deposit box at the Cascades National Bank, but the physical bypass, the only thing that can override the encryption, is hidden in his old hunting lodge. We have to move. Now." Another flashbang grenade bounced across the floor. "Close your eyes!" Julian screamed. I didn't just close them. I dived into the pantry, pulling a heavy cast iron skillet off the hook as I went. The world turned into a blinding white roar. I felt a hand grab my hair, a rough, familiar grip that sent a jolt of PTSD through my spine. "Found you, Mrs. Vane," a gravelly voice whispered. It was Agent Sterling. I recognized the scent of his expensive cologne from the many business dinners Marcus had forced me to attend. He tried to drag me out, but he underestimated one thing: I wasn't the submissive doll he remembered. I swung the skillet with every ounce of bitterness I possessed. The heavy metal connected with his jaw with a sickening crack. Sterling hit the floor, dazed. I stood over him, the Glock pointed directly at his forehead. "Hello, Agent Sterling," I said, my voice dripping with venom. "You look a little different without your suit and your smug smile. Did Marcus tell you I was easy to handle? He was wrong about a lot of things." "Clara, wait." He wheezed, blood leaking from his mouth. "Checkmate, you corrupt piece of trash," I whispered. Before I could pull the trigger, Julian tackled me from the side just as a second wave of agents breached the balcony. "We don't have time for executions," Julian roared over the noise. "The garage, the back elevator is still powered. Move, Clara, or we both die in this penthouse." I looked at Sterling, then at the man with my husband's face. I hated them both, but only one of them had a car key. "Fine," I spat, pushing myself up, "but I'm keeping the skillet and the gun." We sprinted toward the back of the apartment, the sounds of war echoing behind us. As the elevator doors hissed shut, I caught my reflection in the mirrored steel. My face was smeared with soot. My eyes were wild, and for the first time in my life, I recognized the woman staring back. She wasn't a victim. She was the storm. The elevator descended like a plummeting stone. My stomach stayed on the 40th floor, but my heart was racing ahead of us. Beside me, Julian was bleeding from a graze on his temple, his chest heaving. He looked at me, then at the heavy cast iron skillet still white-knuckled in my left hand. "A frying pan. Clara, really." He panted, a dark glint of humor in his eyes. "It worked, didn't it?" I snapped, checking the magazine of my Glock. "Maybe if you were better at your job, I wouldn't have to resort to kitchenware. Now talk. We're heading to the Cascades Lodge, but Sterling's men are going to be crawling all over the I-5. How do we get past them?" "We don't take the I-5, Julian said, as the door slid open to the darkened subgarage. He headed toward a nondescript mud-caked Jeep Wrangler tucked in the far corner, far away from Marcus's flashy collection of Lamborghinis. "We take the logging roads. It'll add 3 hours to the trip, but it's the only way to reach the lodge without a drone spotting us." I climbed into the passenger seat, my eyes scanning the shadows. "Who do you actually work for, Julian? You said the agency. Which one? Or are you just another freelancer looking for a payday?" He ignited the engine. The roar of the Hemi was a comforting vibration in the silence. "I worked for a private firm that specializes in erasing problems. Marcus was a problem. He stole $7.2 million from people who don't believe in tax write-offs. My job was to replace him, find the money, and return it to my employers. But the crash changed the variables." "Variables, you mean me?" I laughed, a sharp, ugly sound. "I was just the trophy you had to manage, right? Did you enjoy it? Playing husband to a woman who was mourning a man she secretly wanted dead?" Julian gripped the steering wheel until his knuckles turned as white as mine. "It wasn't all playing Clara. I saw what he did to you. I saw the bruises that were still healing when I first sat by your hospital bed. I've killed a lot of bad men, but Marcus, he was a special kind of parasite." "Save the sympathy," I hissed, looking out the window as we tore out of the garage tires, screaming against the concrete. "I don't need a savior with a stolen face. I need my money, and I need Sterling's head on a plate." We hit the outskirts of the city within 20 minutes, bypassing the main highways for the narrow, winding veins of the mountain passes. The rain turned into a heavy, wet snow as we climbed higher into the Cascades. The pine trees loomed like jagged teeth against the gray sky. "The lodge is another 5 miles, Julian muttered, his eyes glued to the rearview mirror. "Sterling isn't stupid. He knows Marcus had properties up here. He'll send a team to intercept." "Let them come," I said, leaning my head back against the seat. I spent 7 years trapped in that penthouse. This mountain feels like a playground compared to that. "You're remarkably calm for someone who just hit a federal agent with a skillet," Julian noted. "I'm not calm, Julian. I'm focused. There's a difference." I turned to him, my gaze piercing. "Tell me one thing. The $7.2 million, is it all there, or did you already take a consultant fee?" He hesitated, a fleeting shadow crossing his face. "Most of it is in the offshore account linked to the ledger, but there's a physical backup, a hard drive containing the encryption keys and the names of every corrupt official Marcus was paying off. That's what Sterling really wants. The money is just a bonus. The names are his insurance policy." "Then we burn the names and keep the money," I decided. "It's not that simple." "It is for me," I shouted, the anger flaring up again. "Everyone has been playing with my life for years, Marcus Sterling, and now you? Well, the game is over. I'm the one holding the cards now. If that drive has the keys to my freedom, I'm taking them. And if I have to burn this entire mountain down to keep it from Sterling, I will." The Jeep swerved as we hit a patch of black ice, but Julian corrected it with effortless skill. Up ahead, the silhouette of a sprawling A-frame cabin appeared through the mist. It looked cold, lonely, and haunted. "We're here," Julian whispered. I looked at the lodge, then at my hands. They weren't shaking anymore. Good. Let's see if the ghost of my husband left us anything useful. As we stepped out into the biting cold, a red laser dot suddenly danced across Julian's chest. Down! I screamed, lunging at him, but the first shot had already shattered the Jeep's windshield. The bullet didn't just shatter the glass. It shattered the illusion of safety I'd spent the last 3 hours clinging to. I tackled Julian, our bodies hitting the frozen gravel with a bone-jarring thud. Sniper! 3 o'clock in the loft of the tool shed. Julian yelled, his face pressed against the icy dirt. I see him, I shouted back. The adrenaline was no longer a mist. It was a roaring engine in my veins. I didn't wait for Julian to give an order. I crawled toward the front bumper of the Jeep, the freezing slush soaking through my designer jeans. Cover me, I'm going for the porch. Clara, stay down, that's suicide. Watch me, I retorted. Julian popped up, firing a rapid-fire sequence of suppressive shots toward the shed. I didn't hesitate. I sprinted. My lungs burned with the thin mountain air, and every footfall felt like a gamble with death. I dived over the wooden railing of the porch, just as a second bullet splintered the log post where my head had been a second before. I rolled to my feet, my back against the rough cedar wall. Julian scrambled up behind me a moment later, his breathing ragged. You're either the bravest woman I've ever met or the most reckless, he panted, checking his magazine. I've lived with a predator for 7 years, Julian. You learn to move when the monster blinks. I snapped. I kicked the front door open, the lock snapping easily. The lodge smelled of dust, old pine, and the lingering scent of Marcus's expensive cigars. It made my skin crawl. We moved inside the shadows of the high-beamed ceiling, swallowing us. Julian headed straight for the fireplace, but I headed for the kitchen. What are you doing? The safe is behind the hearth, Julian hissed. I know where the safe is, but Marcus was a paranoid drunk. He kept a backup for his backup, I said. I reached under the heavy oak dining table and pulled at a loose floorboard I'd discovered 3 years ago during a particularly lonely Christmas. I pulled out a small metal lockbox. Inside wasn't the ledger. It was a burner phone and a set of keys to a 1969 Mustang parked in the secondary shed. He was planning to run. I whispered, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. He wasn't just hiding from the Russians. He was planning to leave me behind in the crossfire while he vanished with the $7.2 million. Julian walked over, looking at the keys. He was a coward until the end. And you're the man wearing his cowardice like a suit, I said, standing up and glaring at him. Do you realize how much I hate looking at you? Every time you smile, every time you breathe, I see the man who told me I was nothing, and now I find out he was going to leave me to die. I felt a sob rise in my throat, but I choked it back, turning it into a snarl. I marched over to the fireplace, shoved Julian aside, and began ripping the stones away from the hidden compartment. Clara, wait, let me... Get lost! I roared. I found the latch and pulled. The heavy stone swung out, revealing a sleek black pelican case. There it is, Julian breathed. I gripped the handle of the case, but I didn't hand it to him. I held the Glock to the side of the case. One move, Julian and I put a bullet through the hardware. I want the truth. No more private firm bullshit. Who are you? Julian sighed, leaning against the mantel. For the first time, the predatory edge in his eyes softened into something weary. My name is Silas. I wasn't hired by an agency, Clara. I was Marcus's brother. The one he told everyone died in a tragic accident 20 years ago. He stole my identity, my inheritance, and then he left me to rot in a Bulgarian prison so I couldn't reclaim it. I froze. The resemblance, it wasn't just plastic surgery. It was blood. He used me as a blueprint for his life, and then he discarded me. Silas said, his voice trembling with a suppressed rage that mirrored my own. I tracked him down to kill him, but the crash did it for me. I took his face to take back what he stole from me. Not just the money, the life. So we're both victims of the same ghost, I whispered, the gun lowering slightly. Yes. But only one of us can walk away with the money. A new voice boomed from the doorway. I spun around. Standing there, silhouetted by the snow and the dim light, was Special Agent Sterling. He held a high-powered rifle leveled at my heart, his jaw bruised and swollen from my earlier hit. Give me the case, Clara, Sterling said, a cruel smirk twisting his face. And maybe I'll let you live long enough to see how I spend your husband's retirement fund. You want it? I shouted, my grip tightening on the case. Come and take it from the woman you thought was too weak to fight back. The air in the lodge turned glacial. Sterling stepped further into the room, the red laser from his rifle dancing across my collarbone. Behind him, two more shadows hovered his hired muscle, looking more like mercenaries than federal agents. You've grown quite the spine, Clara. Sterling mocked, his voice muffled by the swelling in his jaw. But let's be realistic. You're a socialite with a stolen gun, and Silas here is a ghost who's run out of haunts. Hand over the Pelican case, and I'll make sure your death certificate says accidental overdose instead of resisting arrest. I looked at Silas. He was coiled like a spring, his eyes darting toward the heavy iron fire poker near my feet. He was waiting for me to blink, but I was done blinking. You think this is about the money for me, Sterling? I asked, my voice terrifyingly calm. I held the Pelican case over the roaring fire I'd sparked moments ago to ward off the chill. Marcus took 7 years of my life. You helped him do it. You took his bribes to look the other way while he broke my ribs and my spirit. $7.2 million, that's not a fortune. That's the invoice for my pain. Clara, don't be stupid, Sterling growled, his finger tightening on the trigger. Move that case away from the fire. Or what, you'll kill me. I laughed, a jagged, hollow sound that echoed off the rafters. I've been dead since the day I married Marcus. You're just threatening to make it official. I looked at Silas and gave a sharp, imperceptible nod. Now! I screamed. I swung the heavy Pelican case not into the fire but directly at Sterling's head. At the same instant, Silas lunged, grabbing the fire poker and swinging it with a guttural roar. The room erupted into chaos. Sterling fired the bullet, whizzing past my ear and shattering a crystal decanter on the sideboard. I didn't wait to see if it hit him. I dove behind the heavy oak dining table, the wood splinters flying as the mercenaries opened fire. Clara! The cellar! Silas yelled. He had knocked one mercenary down and was engaged in a brutal hand-to-hand struggle with the second. Not without the drive. I crawled through the debris, my fingers catching the handle of the Pelican case that had slid near the hearth. I felt a hand grab my ankle. Sterling. He crawled over me, his face a mask of bloody fury. He pinned me to the floor, his heavy boot pressing down on my wrist until the Glock clattered away. You little bitch, he hissed, reaching for his combat knife. I'm going to enjoy carving that defiance out of you. The rage that had been a slow burn in my chest for years finally exploded. I didn't scream for help. I reached out my fingers, finding the jagged shard of the broken decanter. With a scream of pure, unadulterated hate, I drove the glass into the meat of his thigh. Sterling shrieked, his grip loosening. I didn't stop. I kicked him squarely in his broken jaw and scrambled backward, grabbing the Pelican case. Silas finished the second mercenary with a sickening crack of the fire poker and turned toward us. Sterling was reaching for his rifle, but Silas was faster. He delivered a roundhouse kick that sent the agent sprawling into the embers of the fireplace. The cellar now, Silas grabbed my arm, pulling me toward the hidden trapdoor behind the bar. We tumbled down the wooden stairs just as the third mercenary regained consciousness and started spraying the floorboards above us with lead. Silas slammed the heavy oak bolt shut. In the sudden damp silence of the cellar, the only sound was our ragged breathing. The smell of old wine and dirt surrounded us. "Are you hit?" Silas asked, his hands shaking as he checked me over in the dim light of his phone's flashlight. "I'm fine," I snapped, shoving his hands away, though my wrist was throbbing painfully. I clutched the pelican case to my chest. "But Sterling isn't dead. He won't stop until he has this." "He doesn't want the money anymore, Clara. Now it's personal," Silas whispered. He looked at me, the stolen face of my husband covered in soot and blood. "Why didn't you throw it in the fire? You could have ended it right there." I looked at the case, then back at him. "Because if I burn this, I have nothing. No future, no leverage, no way to make sure people like Sterling never touch me again. I'm done being the victim, Silas. From here on out, I'm the one holding the leash." Above us, the heavy thuds of boots echoed on the floorboards. They were looking for the entrance. "We have to go," Silas said, pointing to a narrow coal chute at the back of the cellar. "It leads to the woods. If we can reach the Mustang in the secondary shed, we might have a chance." "Then let's go," I said, standing up and wiping the blood from my forehead. "I've got a debt to collect, and I'm not leaving this mountain until the account is settled." The coal chute was a narrow, suffocating throat of stone and soot. I crawled through it, the jagged walls scraping my shoulders, but I didn't feel the pain. The only thing I felt was the heavy weight of the pelican case dragging beneath me and the freezing mountain air calling from the other end. We spilled out into the snow behind the lodge, masked by the shadows of the towering pines. The storm had intensified, white flakes whipping around us like a shroud. "The shed is 200 yards that way," Silas whispered, his breath hitching. He was limping now. The struggle in the lodge had taken its toll. "If the Mustang starts, we can break for the old logging trail. It bypasses the main gate." "It'll start," I said, my teeth chattering, but my grip on the Glock firm. Marcus was obsessed with that car. He treated it better than he ever treated me. We moved through the waist-deep drifts, the lodge glowing behind us like a dying ember. Suddenly, a searchlight swept the tree line, cutting through the blizzard with surgical precision. A drone hummed overhead, a high-pitched, predatory whine. "Get down!" Silas shoved me into the hollow of a fallen cedar. The light passed inches from us. Through the trees, I saw more black SUVs pulling up to the lodge. This wasn't just a retrieval team anymore. Sterling had called in a small army. "He's not just a special agent, is he?" I whispered, looking at the tactical coordination of the men moving toward the house. "Sterling is the head of a shadow division," Silas replied, his voice barely audible over the wind. "He doesn't just take bribes, Clara. He manages the entire network Marcus laundered for. If that ledger goes public, it doesn't just ruin Sterling, it topples half the Senate and 3 major cartels. That's why he's burning the forest to find us." "Good," I said, a grim smile touching my lips. "The more people who want this, the more it's worth. I'm not just looking for a payout anymore, Silas. I'm looking for a massacre." "You're becoming a very dangerous woman, Clara." "I was always dangerous. I just didn't have a reason to show it until now." We reached the secondary shed, a dilapidated structure overgrown with ivy. Silas kicked the door open. Inside, under a dusty tarp, sat the '69 Mustang. It was a midnight blue beast, smelling of gasoline and old leather. I jumped into the driver's seat. I didn't care that Silas was the professional operative. This was my husband's car, and I knew exactly where he hid the kill switch. I reached under the dash, flipped the toggle, and turned the key. The engine roared to life, a guttural mechanical scream that echoed through the shed. "Clara, wait!" Silas shouted, pointing at the monitors. A screen on the dash part of Marcus's illegal modifications flickered to life. It was a localized feed. Sterling's face appeared illuminated by the red glow of the lodge's emergency lights. He looked like a demon, his jaw bandaged and his eyes burning with a psychotic intensity. "I know you can hear me, Clara." Sterling's voice crackled through the car's speakers. "You think you're escaping. I've already frozen every account in your name. I've flagged your passport as a domestic terrorist. There is nowhere on this planet you can go where I won't find you. Give me the drive, and I'll let Silas walk. You, however, you have a lot to answer for." I grabbed the receiver for the car's radio system, my knuckles white. "Sterling, can you hear me?" "I hear you, Clara. Be smart." "I am being smart," I spat. "You think you can freeze my life? You already did that 7 years ago? You think I'm afraid of being a terrorist? I've been living with a monster every day of my life. You're just a man with a badge and a broken jaw. Come and get me, you coward. I'll be waiting at the bottom of the mountain." I slammed the Mustang into gear and floored it. The shed doors burst open as we rocketed out into the snow, the tires spinning for a second before catching the gravel. "What are you doing?" Silas yelled as we drifted dangerously close to the cliff edge. "The logging trail is the other way." "We're not taking the trail," I shouted over the roar of the wind and the engine. "Sterling thinks he's the one hunting us. I'm going to show him what happens when the prey stops running." I sped straight onto the main road, the headlights of the SUVs flashing in the distance like the eyes of a pack of wolves. "Clara, this is not a good idea." "No, Silas," I said, shifting to fourth gear. "This is an escape strategy." The Mustang screamed as I pushed it past 90 on a road designed for 30. The tires danced on the edge of the icy precipice, sending plumes of slush into the dark abyss of the ravine below. Behind us, the high beams of 3 black SUVs cut through the snow like hunting spears. "You're going to get us killed before Sterling even has a chance to," Silas yelled, bracing his hand against the dashboard. "Shut up and look for the turnoff," I shouted back. My eyes were fixed on the road, my heart hammering a rhythm of pure, unadulterated defiance. "Marcus didn't just build a lodge up here, Silas. He built a graveyard. There's an old mining quarry 3 miles down. He used to joke that it was the perfect place to hide the things people weren't supposed to find." "Including his brother," Silas muttered, his jaw tight. "Including anyone who crossed him," I replied. I saw a flash of red in the rear view, a laser sight from the lead SUV. Crack! The passenger side mirror exploded into 1,000 silver shards. "They're not trying to stop us anymore," Silas said, drawing his weapon. "They're clearing the lane. Hold on." I slammed the brakes and yanked the emergency handle. The Mustang spun 180 degrees in a perfect, terrifying drift, the rear bumper kissing the guardrail before I floored it into a narrow, unpaved path shrouded by ancient pines. We bounced violently over frozen ruts and hidden boulders. The SUVs tried to follow, but their heavy frames were their undoing. One of them clipped a tree, its front end crumpling like tinfoil, while the other 2 slowed down to navigate the treacherous terrain. The path opened up into a massive, hollowed-out crater, the quarry. In the moonlight, the jagged stone walls looked like the rib cage of a giant beast. I killed the lights and drifted the car into the shadow of a rusted crane. "Why here?" Silas whispered, his hand on the door latch. "Because the $7. 2 million isn't just numbers on a drive, Silas," I said, turning to him. My face was cold, my voice devoid of the fear that had defined my marriage. Marcus was an old-school thief. He didn't trust the cloud. He kept a physical fallback gold bullion and cash buried right under the floor of the foreman's shack over there. He made me watch him bury it once just to show me how much more he valued the dirt than he did me. And you've been sitting on this secret the whole time. I was waiting for a reason to dig it up, I said, grabbing the Pelican case and the Glock. And I think a federal agent's funeral is a pretty damn good reason. We scrambled toward the shack, a rotting timber structure perched on the edge of the quarry pit. Inside, the floorboards groaned. I didn't need a shovel. The wood was so decayed I could pull it up with my bare hands. Underneath, buried in a shallow grave of silt, was a heavy steel locker. "Help me," I grunted. Together, we hauled it out. Silas used the butt of his pistol to smash the rusted padlock. When the lid creaked open, the sight was blinding, even in the dark. Bundles of $100 bills vacuum-sealed, and rows of gold bars stamped with Swiss markings. "It's all here." Silas breathed a look of disbelief on his stolen face. "This is more than $7.2 million. With the gold, it's nearly 10. "It's not enough," I whispered, hearing the roar of engines approaching the quarry entrance. "It's never enough for what they took." I looked at the Pelican case, then at the locker of gold. I felt a strange, chilling clarity. I wasn't just a woman with a gun anymore. I was a woman with a kingdom to defend. "Silas, listen to me," I said, grabbing his collar. "Sterling is coming. He thinks he's trapped us in a pit, but he doesn't know about the blasting caps Marcus kept in the locker for insurance." Silas looked at the sticks of commercial dynamite tucked in the corner of the locker, then back at me. A slow, dangerous grin spread across his face. "You want to bury them?" "I want to bury the past," I corrected. "And I want to make sure the only thing Sterling finds down here is his own grave." The first SUV roared into the quarry, its searchlight sweeping the shack. Sterling's voice boomed through a megaphone, distorted and monstrous. "Clara, Silas, there's nowhere left to run. Give me the drive, and I'll make it quick." I looked at Silas, the man who looked like my nightmare, but acted like my only ally. "Ready to be a ghost again?" "I never stopped being one," he replied. I ignited the fuse. The fuse hissed a tiny, rhythmic spark that sounded like a countdown to my rebirth. The orange glow reflected in Silas's eyes, and for a heartbeat, I didn't see Marcus. I saw a man who had been hollowed out by the same ghost that had haunted me. 30 seconds. Silas whispered, his voice steady. "Clara, move." We didn't run toward the entrance where Sterling's men were dismounting. We ran toward the back of the quarry where the rusted crane leaned over a steep, rocky embankment. My boots slipped on the loose shale, but I clawed at the frozen earth, fueled by a frantic burning spite. "There! Over the ridge!" Sterling's voice echoed, followed by the deafening crack, crack, crack of semi-automatic fire. Bullets chewed into the wooden shack behind us. One grazed the steel locker, sparking against the gold. I reached the crest of the ridge and collapsed behind a jagged slab of granite just as the night turned into noon. Boom! The explosion was a physical fist that slammed into my chest, knocking the air from my lungs. A pillar of fire erupted from the shack, fueled by the dynamite and the dry, rotting timber. The shockwave shattered the windshields of the SUVs, parked 50 yards away. The quarry walls groaned, and then, with the slow, terrifying majesty of a dying god, the eastern face of the cliff began to collapse. Tons of rock and frozen earth cascaded down, burying the shack, the SUVs, and the men screaming beside them under a tomb of ancient stone. Silence followed, a heavy, ringing silence that tasted like copper and dust. Is it over?" I wheezed, pushing a heavy layer of grit off my face. Silas rose beside me, his clothes torn, his face a mask of soot. He looked down into the crater. The shack was gone. The gold, the cash, and Sterling's men were entombed under 20 feet of rubble. "For them, yes," Silas said, coughing. "But Sterling, he wasn't near the cars." As if summoned by his name, a figure emerged from the shadows of the rusted crane. Sterling was a wreck. His tactical vest was shredded. His face was a tapestry of blood and burns, and he limped heavily, dragging one leg. But he still held his sidearm, and his eyes were wide with a psychotic, unhinged clarity. You stupid, arrogant girl! Sterling rasped, his voice a wet rattle. You buried it. You buried the only thing that could have bought your life. I stood up, shaking off Silas's hand. I walked toward the edge of the ridge until I was looking down at him. The cold wind whipped my hair across my face, but I didn't flinch. I didn't bury my life, Sterling. I shouted down, my voice echoing in the hollow quarry. I buried yours. That drive in the Pelican case? It wasn't the only copy. I sent the encryption key to 3 different news outlets the moment we hit the logging road. By sunrise, your name will be the most hunted word on the internet. It was a lie, a beautiful, desperate lie, but it hit him harder than the explosion. Sterling's face contorted. He raised his gun, his hand shaking. I'll kill you, he whimpered. I'll kill you and find the keys myself. You don't have the time, I said, pointing toward the horizon. In the distance, the faint, rhythmic thump, thump, thump of helicopter rotors began to vibrate in the air. Blue and red lights began to flicker through the trees at the quarry entrance. Local police state troopers, the sheer scale of the explosion had drawn them like moths to a flame. You're a dead man, Sterling, I said, my voice dropping to a deadly whisper. And the best part? You're going to spend the rest of your life in a cage knowing you were outsmarted by the woman you called a socialite. Sterling let out a guttural scream of rage and fired. The bullet whizzed past my shoulder, but before he could pull the trigger again, Silas fired a single precise shot from his suppressed pistol. The bullet caught Sterling in the shoulder, spinning him around. He fell backward, tumbling into the dark, silt-filled pool at the bottom of the quarry. He didn't resurface. Silas turned to me, his gun lowering. The police are 5 minutes out. We have to go, Clara, now, or we're just 2 more bodies in the rubble. The money is gone, Silas, I said, looking at the landslide. All of it. Silas reached into his jacket and pulled out a thick, vacuum-sealed brick of $100 bills and the Pelican case. I grabbed enough to get us across the border. And the drive, it's still the only copy. Your lie back there. It was brilliant. Let's make it the truth. I looked at the money, then at the man with the stolen face. I reached out and took the gun from his hand. I'm not going across any border with you, Silas, I said, the coldness returning to my heart. You're a witness, and you still have his face. The silence between us was sharper than any knife. The sirens wailed, drawing closer through the frozen pines. I held the Glock steady, the front sight centered on Silas's forehead. The fire from the quarry below cast a hellish glow over the face that had haunted my dreams. Clara put the gun down, Silas said, his voice eerily calm. Why? I spat, my finger tightening on the trigger. You're just another liar wearing my nightmare skin. You used me as a map to find that gold. I stayed to see you wake up, he countered, stepping toward me. Look at yourself. You outran Sterling. You blew up a mountain. If you kill me, you're just finishing Marcus's work. You're becoming a murderer for a man who's already dead. I looked at him, the exhaustion, the blood, the stolen features. If I pulled this trigger, I'd be tied to Marcus forever. If I let you walk, I hissed, I never want to see that face again. Erase him. Erase yourself. If our paths ever cross, I won't hesitate. Silas nodded slowly. He's been dead to me for years. I lowered the gun and snatched the Pelican case from his hand. Go! Now! He vanished into the shadows of the blizzard without a word. I scrambled down the ridge to the one surviving SUV. I slammed it into gear, crashing through the brush, just as the police perimeter closed in behind me. 200 miles away, as the sun rose over a different horizon, I pulled over. I opened the Pelican case and plugged the drive into the dashboard laptop. I saw the names, the bribes, and the $7.2 million accounts. But then I found a folder labeled Clara. Inside was a photo of me from our wedding day. On the back, Marcus had written, "Property of MV. Do not break." A scream of liberating fury tore from my throat. I didn't want the leverage. I didn't want the blood money. I grabbed the hard drive and smashed it against a rock until it was nothing but dust. "I am not property," I whispered to the wind. The Arizona desert smelled of sagebrush and heat, a stark contrast to the frozen, suffocating peaks of the Cascades. I sat in a small, dusty diner off Route 66, watching the heat waves dance over the asphalt. In front of me sat a glass of iced tea and a local newspaper. The headline was small, tucked away on page 4. "Mysterious explosion at Cascade Quarry remains unsolved. Federal agent missing." I leaned back, a faint, sharp smile touching my lips. Sterling was a shadow in a watery grave. Marcus was a pile of ash. And Silas, he was whoever he had decided to become. As for Clara Vane, she had died in that quarry too. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a new pristine passport. The name inside was Sloan Mercer. It was a name I'd chosen because it sounded like cold steel and open roads. A month had passed since I smashed the drive. I had kept exactly $150,000 from the cash brick Silas gave me, just enough to disappear, but not enough to be worth hunting. The rest of the money, nearly $7 million, remained locked in accounts that no one would ever be able to touch without the encryption keys I had ground into the dirt. I didn't want the blood money. I wanted the silence. The waitress, a woman with tired eyes and a kind smile, walked over to refill my glass. "You traveling far, honey." I looked at her, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel the need to look down or hide the fire in my eyes. "Just far enough," I replied. My voice was steady, the rasp of the mountain air still lingering in my throat. "You look like a woman who's just finished a very long race," she noted, setting the pitcher down. "I didn't just finish it," I said, gripping the edge of the table. "I won it." I paid the bill in cash and walked out into the blinding sunlight. My new car, a used but reliable black SUV with no history and no ghosts, sat idling in the lot. I climbed in, adjusted the rearview mirror, and paused. I looked at my reflection. The bruises had faded into faint yellowish shadows. The fear that used to live in the corners of my mouth was gone, replaced by a hard, determined line. I looked like a stranger to myself, and I loved it. I pulled out onto the highway, heading west toward the coast. I had no husband to fear, no agency to run from, and no past to bury. I was 32 years old. I had a tank full of gas, and for the first time in my existence, my life belonged entirely to me. As I accelerated, I reached over to the passenger seat and picked up the heavy brass statue I'd used to strike Sterling. I had kept it as a reminder not of the violence, but of the moment I chose to fight back. I rolled down the window and, with a final surge of that beautiful, righteous anger, hurled it into the desert scrub. I didn't look back to see where it landed. I just kept driving the road ahead, stretching out like a clean white page, waiting for me to write the first word. Never let anyone treat you like property. Your freedom is worth more than any price tag. No matter how dark your past was, you're the one holding the pen now. So drive fast, stay free, and never look back. Thanks for listening to the story. If you enjoyed it, please hit that like button and drop a comment below to let me know what you think. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next one.